This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. The holidays mean more travel, more shopping, more time online, and more personal info in places that could expose you to identity theft. That's why LifeLock monitors millions of data points every second. If your identity is stolen, their US-based restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed or your money back. Get more holiday fun and less holiday worry with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Welcome back to Rams Up, your favorite LA Rams podcast. We are part of the Fans First Sports Network. You can follow us on our YouTube channel as well at LA Rams Up. I'm your host, Mark. I'll be joined occasionally by my football gurus, Paul and Ian. Let's get to it. Hey, what's going on, Ram fans? We are going to dive into our NFL draft talk for the first time this episode for you short-time listeners. You know, last draft season, Paul Wally had joined me quite often to talk prospects because that's his wheelhouse. And we're going to start talking about some NFL draft prospects today. What's going on, Paul? How you feeling?
Fantastic. Shout out to the worldwide Ramley. Hope everybody had a great Christmas with the fam. And Mark's being a little humble there. His draft insights are just as valuable.
Hey, you know, what's really cool about doing these draft prospect analysis with you is you really learn so much about players. Like, you know, Max Melton pops up the other day and I go, I know who he is. I know where he played. I know about where he got drafted. And it really does help it. You know, we just become more knowledgeable, we become smarter football fans. But speaking of smarter football fans, man, I'm still trying to recover from that Bears-Seahawks game. It set back the NFL 100 years, I think. It was, oh man, it was just really sad football, especially at the end there. But man, hopefully we see some better football Saturday night with the Rams and Cardinals, huh?
I think we were all pulling for a Caleb miracle, but listen, hey, look, Rams take care of business tomorrow. We get some help from a couple of teams, and it looks good, right? If you take a look at some of the teams, like, for example, Cincy, et cetera. So I think we'll be okay. I think we might have some good news at the end of Sunday.
Yeah, you know, my special assistant, before we get to the draft stuff, it's worth talking about because it's probably more important, more heavy on the minds of Ram fans. If they do not clinch, let's say they beat the Cardinals, but they do not have that strength of victory locked up, I could see the NFL having the Rams-Seahawks play Saturday, so the Rams don't know yet if they have it locked up via strength of victory and kind of forcing the action. You need to go out and play this game like it was for the divisional championship, and that actually makes sense. So we'll see what happens. First things first, they got to beat the Cardinals.
So you could see Mark's marketing genius already looking at how to boost ratings for the TV networks. Way to go!
Right. So I thought what we do, Paul and I talked a little bit about this, and you know, last year there are rumors that the Rams were interested in going after Brock Bowers. Trading up to draft him. And the year before it was Dalton Kincaid. And so we thought, you know, let's look at the tight ends. We'll start talking about the tight ends first. That's what we're going to do this episode. Talk about the top prospects and how they might fit with the Rams. And I guess the first thing we should do is let's look at the Rams' current draft room. And before we get to that, the four guys we are going to talk about are Tyler Warren out of Penn State, Colston Loveland out of Michigan, Gunnar Helm out of Texas, and Mason Taylor out of LSU. And we'll talk about a few other guys as well. Those are probably the four that we identified as most attractive from the Rams' perspective anyways. Before we start, though, let's just review the Rams' tight end room. Tyler Higbee signed through 2025. For those listening in on the pod, I'll try to talk through this as much as I can for your benefit. So Higbee signed through 2025. And Paul, is he one of those untouchable Rams that would they ever consider moving on from Tyler Higbee? They're just going to let him play out his contract, right?
So yeah, so I think so Big Rig Higgs, I think just the reception he received from the sideline sort of cements him at least until the end of 25, right? 2026, where they can void that option, and there are some parameters that have to be met for that to happen. So it's going to be tough to say, like when we take a look at it, because when we look at the other three players, uh, if it does sort of go that way where tight end becomes like a major position of interest for the Rams, it might actually work out in their favor if you take a look at this long-term projection, which is why we're starting off with like the Rams tight end room. As it stands right now, take a look at this tight end room, and we've talked about it, and I commented on it, particularly Hunter Long. I thought Hunter Long was playing his best football, right? I really did. I love to watch him play every weekend. You just saw it both in the blocking aspect of it, and he was starting to get a couple of receptions here and there. Davis Allen is just an uber talented player, young player, and what has happened with a lot of Ram tight ends, it's just inexplicable in the sense of they don't really flourish in this sort of scenario, being the second tight end in this offense. And I think it's a little bit more than just because of the 11 formation. Ram Nation, there's sort of this misconception that Sean McVay is not tight end centric. But Ram fans, this has been a search, right, Mark, that has been going on since McVay arrived here for the Rams and trying to find this tight end, just to throw out some names, Jacob Harris, Bryson Hopkins, Jared Everett. So, this, for some reason, they don't necessarily pan out. So Davis Allen is another in a long line of tight end twos that we're still waiting to sort of take that next step. Colby Parkinson, we know that was a very curious signing for some big money after the Higbee injury. And as you can see there, $22.5 million through 24 through 26. So in terms of their overall room, there's a ton of talent there. Hunter Long, as you can see, is the unrestricted free agent at the end of the year, right? His contract expires. So if he moves out, you could have a prospect slide right into that spot. I personally would love to see him stick around, but, it's going to be interesting. The key to this room is really going to be what they do with Parkinson, in my opinion, right? A rookie deal for Davis Allen is perfect for what the Rams want. How they're going to handle the Parkinson scenario is really going to be the key to this room moving forward.
Yeah, my thought on Hunter Long is he may be itching to leave because he wants more opportunity. He thought he might get it here, and it really hasn't happened, and it's a bit of a shame. And now with four tight ends and all four of them active last week, anyways, he's not going to be getting as many opportunities as he deserves, I don't think. And so, I don't think it's necessarily a foregone conclusion, but I think there would be a market for Hunter Long. And it makes sense that he would be like, hey, you know what? You guys aren't giving me opportunities here. I'm moving on. And Colby, I don't know what dare I say, would they move on from him? I don't know what kind of dead cap hit we're talking about. I could have looked it up. I should have. Maybe we'll talk about that next episode. But Tyler Higbee getting up there in years. So, like you said, McVay loves the tight end position. He just keeps on, I would say, swinging and missing, but he hasn't hit that home run yet. And this is a really good draft for tight ends. So I think he's going to draft a tight end. And if he does, that would just make it more likely that Hunter Long's going to move on, and maybe they move on from Colby Parkinson, but I'm just guessing here. Who really knows?
Yeah, that's why we were sort of what we were talking about. This was like, this could go, this is really a discussion that's, it starts now, but, as the draft process moves forward, and everybody watched that video, right, about McVay's, he was just, I guess like the only way you could describe it, he was like jumping out of his shoes at the prospect of being able to draft, Bowers. So I think that just sort of tipped everybody off to like, wow, he's really serious about this. And we had
Yeah.
talked about it at post-draft day, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay, let's move on to I wouldn't say the top prospect. The first prospect we're going to talk about here is Colston Loveland out of Michigan, 6'5", 245, 4.7 40 time, 11 TDs over his 3 seasons, 1,400 yards. And, on some draft boards, I think sometimes there's this contrarian attitude with draft prospects. Everybody just assumes it's going to be Tyler Warren. And if you asked 100 fans, 99 of them are going to tell you Tyler Warren is the top tight end in the draft. And then you see these draft boards, and, a lot of them have Colston Loveland at the top. And sometimes I think it's just, these draft boards trying to be cute. Sometimes they maybe know more than we do as far as a guy fitting in at the NFL level. Who knows? Maybe it's just clickbait, even. Hey, Colston Loveland's our number one tight end, and I'm not trying to besmirch Colston Loveland. He very well could be, but how do you tell us about how you feel about Colston Loveland and how he might fit with the Rams?
Yeah, so that's perfect setting of the stage. So Ram Nation, the way we sort of set it up is we really put the top priority is how they would fit in this sort of not just a tight end room, but in sort of this Ram offense, right? In this Ram culture. And that's really, so we didn't put it in any particular order. We just basically put it 4 prospects that we thought make sense when you look at it, not just from the eyeball test, but sort of all the other intangibles that have become a priority for the Rams. So, Colston Loveland, it's very easy to try and understand why so many people. He is one of those players that passes the eyeball test almost immediately. And when I first saw it, I saw that number 18, Mark, and I don't want to sway you. When I saw that number 18, you know who I thought of right away? I said, holy moly, this is just a jumbo version of our buddy Coop, right? So there are a lot of factors when you look at him in terms of what makes him so attractive. The other thing is very early in the process, right? There are games still being played, not necessarily with some of our prospects, but games just being played in the NCAA. So it's a little different feel. It's very early in the process. A lot of it comes down to the combine. So, let's just take a look at him in particular. So he plays for a powerhouse team, Michigan. Michigan does have a positive history of churning out successful tight ends. Just a little bit in terms of his history. He this year was second team All-American. Guess who came out second to? Our buddy Warren over at PSU. He had 56 receptions in 10 games, 5 TDs, a healthy 10.5-yard average. He played high school ball in Idaho, played both football and basketball. He played tight end and linebacker when he played football. And he brings that linebacker mentality to the tight end position. He was the number 1 player in Idaho when he came out, Mark. 4-star recruit. He played as a freshman. More importantly, he played big in big games. When you take a look at his history, he played big in big games. He caught a TD in the Big Ten championship game. He was the leading receiver in the national championship game for Michigan. He had 3 catches for 64 yards. And he is leaving as Michigan's all-time leader for receptions by a tight end. And this is really notable, Ram Nation. Remember, Michigan is a very ground and pound, run-heavy offense. So when I was taking a look at this, Mark, this is what I did. I really looked at when McCarthy was there, right, and saw how much of a difference did that season make to this season. And you definitely saw the progression. Absolutely. So that's a real positive that I would throw out there for this player is that, Colston, I just love the way he has progressed from his time here in Michigan. In terms of positives, I would describe him, I would say he is a very impressive athlete. Like I said, passes the eyeball test. I love catch radius. I will talk catch radius all day long when it comes to receivers and tight ends. So once again, Ram Nation, a lot of the numbers that we have on here are unofficial, but I was able to find that in high school, Mark, this is going to be unbelievable. His wingspan was 79 inches. That was in high school. So can you imagine what it is now? And when you watch him play, you just marvel. You're like, holy cow, like his dimensions are just very, very impressive. So one thing I do also like about the catch radius scenario, it's a metric that translates very well to success at the NFL level. Great length, 6'5", 245. He comes from a program that is known for putting out solid prospects. And I think he's pro ready. When I watch him, he understands route running. He knows how to attack zone coverages. He's super athletic, but also he brings great versatility to the position. What does that mean? You can stand him up. He can line him up in line. He's great on the move, and he's perfect for something that the Rams do. He is perfect for that insert concept. And what that means, Ram Nation, is when you have a player like a tight end, H-back, wide receiver, and as they motion, they become a blocker. They motion into the line and either can have a kick-out block, can be a lead blocker, can do a variety of things. And I was able to watch him, and he really did it well, and he was comfortable doing it. So he is perfect for that 11 scheme. You can stand him up in the 11. He could be the second tight end, what we call the flex tight end in the 12, which is a 2 tight end set. But more importantly, why I think he's going to be very attracted to Sean McVay is that you could create a very hyper-aggressive 11. So what does that mean? Where you would have 3 wide receivers and a tight end, but the tight end that's on the field is almost like a pseudo wide receiver, like in this case, a jumbo wide receiver with that type of athleticism. He plays with aggression. He finishes every reception with a forearm shiver. If you watch closely, there are times when a defender is coming to meet him. That's how he finishes the play. Doesn't often run out of bounds. So I like the way he finishes his receptions and his runs. The only negatives I could really say when I was taking a look at everything, a lot of the stuff that I read on him, is that, they obviously, and that's pretty much for every tight end coming out of college, anybody who doesn't come out of Iowa, right? Any tight end that doesn't come out of Iowa, they need work on their inline blocking. So, but I wouldn't waste him as a full-time inline blocker. I think a split where he's standing up 60% of the time or 65% of the time or motioning most of the time, I think would be perfect for it. A lot of scouts brought up his top end speed. It doesn't really explode on film, but also the way they used him in Michigan was a lot of ball control scenarios. The combine, 40 and the workouts are going to really decide how high he goes, his pick status. Right now, they're projecting most likely mid to the bottom of round 1, but I'd be surprised if he lasts to the bottom of round 1. I mean, he looks really smooth out there. His numbers aren't as flashy as, let's say, like Warren this year. And he shows a lot of possession type catches. But one thing that really stood out for me, he's one of those players that when he gets the NFL coaching, that's the first thing they're going to tell him. They say, listen, you're not a possession type receiver. You're a big play type of receiver. And Puka that was one of the big differences with Puka when he came to the Rams. That was the first thing, like it's sort of the light bulb went on for him, is that when he catches the ball, he doesn't have to just go down. Try and take it to the house on every possession. And it's really not the fault of the player, right? In that type of offense, like we said, ground and pound, it's about moving the chains. When I watched the film, when McCarthy was there, McCarthy looked his way in clutch situations. That tells me a lot. When your quarterback has that level of trust in you, that's a real positive. The other thing that sort of stood out for me was he didn't break as many tackles as I was expecting. I was expecting a lot more than that. So I think that's where the NFL coaching is really going to pay huge dividends for this tight end. I think Colston is going to benefit from the NFL coaching. I think they're going to tell him, take it to the house, try and take it to the house, be physical, be uber physical when you're out there in space. And I love him as a prospect. There is an undisclosed injury that kept him out of the Ohio State game. They still have not released what the injury was. He did have a shoulder injury earlier in the 2024 season. So there you go. There might be a medical element here that'll come out later on in terms of his health. Hopefully it's all thumbs up, but that's the only real negative that I can I can see is really this injury scenario. The other one would be the improving the inline blocking, but he's a very aggressive player when it comes to blocking on the move. He loves to mix it up. I see nothing but positives with this kid. And if he runs, Mark, if he runs even a semi-impressive 40 time, I think NFL teams are going to be all over him.
Yeah, the tight end position is a bit of an enigma when it comes to the first round of the NFL draft. I think there's just some teams that aren't willing to go there, and then there are other teams that are. So you never really know when I mean, Brock Bowers is probably the exception when a talent like that comes along. But a typical year, I think the tight end is probably the hardest position to project where they're going to go. And it sounds like we might have a couple that could go in the first round. But then in the back of my mind is that would really be an anomaly, I think, if two tight ends went in the first round. Maybe another point of research for me after we're done here. And a former teammate of Blake Corum, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I have a feeling Blake Corum is going to be whispered in the ear of Les Snead and Coach McVay that they bring this guy on board. And your point is well taken. A lot of teams don't really see their tight end as the first option, correct? So that's why you see a lot of these great prospects when they come into the NFL draft. You look at their numbers, you're like, wow, these numbers aren't that impressive. But, that's not always the case when it comes to tight ends. They're not really the first option. And when we get to Warren was the first option this year at PSU. That was like a big difference there. But, in a lot of cases, the other thing will be recency effect. Think about that also, right? The success of ours, how is it going to translate now? Will teams be more comfortable taking a chance, correct? So Bowers didn't just have a good year. He had a ridiculous year, right? Mm-hmm. So and you're talking about a kid that's about 1.5 inches taller, right? 15 pounds heavier, right? So there's a lot there that I think is really I could see scouts becoming enamored with him. Team scouts really want to say, hey, listen, let's take a chance with this guy. The other thing is if the Rams move on from Cooper Kupp, which just saying it, man, is just heartbreaking. But if that is the scenario, this I think is a great direction for the Rams offense to go in because you're creating sort of like, right, we have our 11 set, our 12 set. You're creating sort of like an 11.5 set, if you really think about it, because you got this tight end that's sort of in between that wide receiver and quote unquote a traditional tight end position. That if he runs a decent 40 time, I mean, you're talking about a whole new dimension that you could bring to an offense with this guy's physical abilities, which are very, very rare, right? And his mental makeup is positive. They rave about him as a team player. I mean, and he's got the winning record, right? He's got a national championship under his belt already. So I really like him as a prospect.
Yeah. Hey, but before we move on to Tyler Warren, for those of you that probably real quick brief, so everyone knows, probably most of 11 personnel, 1 running back, 1 tight end, 12 personnel, 1 running back, 2 tight ends. And we make references to that pretty often. And just want to make sure everybody's on the same page with that. Most of you are, I know. Don't mean to be pretend that you guys don't know your football, but there's a few of you that maybe didn't know that yet. Let's move on to Tyler Warren, Penn State, 6'6", 257, a little bit faster for 6'8" speed in the 40, and very productive as well, over 1,600 yards, 17 TDs, geez. And this is a guy that made a name for himself all season long. I think even, people that don't pay close attention to college football like me knew who Tyler Warren was. And he's, I watched him play against, the USC, I think it was, and another game as well. And I'm like, put 3 guys on him. Just shut this guy down. He just keeps on making catches and killing your defense. He's a special talent, and I suspect he's going to go first ahead of Loveland, but I could be completely wrong on that. Talk to us about Tyler Warren.
You might be spot on about that. You talk about a media darling, right? They love Tyler Warren, and going back for a second about your reference about 11 and 12, Ram Nation. So that's really, really important because right now Rams are running two tight ends about 15% of the time. That's like the number that has been fairly steady for them. So that's 85% of the time they got that one tight end scenario. You have a player like Tyler Warren. You have a player like Loveland that we just talked about. When you go to two tight end, you're not giving up a lot in terms of your wide receiver, right? Your ability to attack downfield, your ability to push defensive backs, whether it's on a deep route or a intermediate route, et cetera. So that's really why it's so important when we start talking about the tight end situation, because this would be a very significant shift for the Rams offense. Getting that number to maybe 40% of the time, 30% of the time is a huge shift in offensive philosophy. So going back to Tyler Warren. So Tyler Warren is one of my favorite players in this draft. And if you have a moment, Ram Nation, take a look at his film. You know when I was sold, Mark? When I saw him run that Wildcat, this tight end ran the Wildcat and he went airborne. This tight end, who is 6'6", 260, he went airborne to score a rushing touchdown. I just thought that was awesome. So that's when I was sold on Tyler Warren. So right now they have him listed as 6'6", 260. He finished this year as a first-team All-American. He won the Mackey Award, which is for best tight end in the nation. Look where he's from, Mark. Mechanicsville, Virginia. You got to love that town. You know this kid is going to be a hardworking, physical player. He played quarterback on the football team. He played basketball. He played baseball. He originally committed to Virginia Tech, but then he recommitted to Penn State. He's a hyper-athletic player, crazy skills. He can block. He can catch. We just talked about it. He can run the Wildcat. He can also carry the rock like a fullback. Very physical, very smooth athlete. He loves to lower the shoulder. And like I said, if you just watch the video of him, jumping over the pile near the goal line, you're going to be sold. Back in October, he caught 17 passes for 224 yards and a touchdown against USC. He set the FBS record for tight ends for catches in a regular season game for tight ends. He can play inline. He can stand up. He can flex wide. There were even plays against other teams. Penn State had him pass block, take on edge rushers, which a lot of people, when they talk about tight ends, they always say, can they take on these larger, hyper-aggressive, super quick pass rushers? The only negative that I could really see is that officially, quote unquote, he started only 2 years. He blew up this year. 92 receptions, 1,095 yards, 6 TDs. I love this, 12 yards per reception, Mark. When we start talking about yak ability, this kid, his yak ability is off the charts. He had 4 rushing TDs in addition to his 6 TDs through the air. 4 rushing TDs. So that just shows you his ability to get it done when he's carrying the ball. Can you imagine this kid in the Rams offense running those jet sweeps or, almost lining up like a wing back and H back and taking it and diving it into the B hole? It's got absolutely the B gap and just running over defenders. He needs to refine his route running, but that's pretty much every tight end in college. He needs to exploit his natural abilities a little bit more. I think he's the classic case, Mark, that he gets penalized because he's good at so many things, right? And I'm sure you've seen that before in players, right? They're just good at so many things that people don't have something that they can sink their teeth into, and they sort of penalize the player, right? But when I look at this kid, holy cow, you talk about natural ability. I just think he's a very natural, physical, and athletic player. And I'm going to say this to you right now, Ram Nation. I see him. He is a jumbo version of Taysom Hill, right? One of my favorite players from the Saints. That's who I see this kid as. He can bring it anytime, in any dimension. He'll bring that element of versatility to the Rams offense. He is a matchup nightmare. You have to account for him on every play. Penn State, in clutch situations this year, looked his way almost every single time.
That's the thing. Tyler Warren, more so than these other tight ends, I think he was one of, if not the focal point of their offense, and nobody could stop him still.
He was a featured player, correct? And your
Right.
point is spot on. Here you go. He's a featured player. And guess what? In clutch situations, he was able to come through. But look at the versatility he brings. Inline tight end, H-back, slot, fullback, wildcat quarterback. I mean, with this impressive size, Mark, who's going to match up with this guy? Taysom Hill is what, 6'2", 225? And look at the damage he does. Let's bring in a guy that's 6'6", 260. And the other thing, too, man, is that's really impressive is, can you imagine these two players, Loveland and Warren, in an NFL conditioning program? How much more impressive are they going to be? They're going to be absolute monsters on the football field. So, yeah, I love this kid, too. I think he's going to turn up the volume on the Rams offense. I think both of them very different players. But I think both of them would bring that element of versatility, deep strike capacity, physicality, and just tenacity. And I think they'd be great in the locker room. Both these players, just their demeanor and their profile just speaks to the Rams locker room.
Yeah, and he was a high school quarterback, and if I'm not mistaken, he's a lefty.
Yeah.
And for those of you who don't know, I mean, these things pop up once in a while, and I feel like it's my responsibility to mention, John Mackey. Let's talk about John Mackey real quickly, the John Mackey Award. And a lot of you younger fans are like, who the heck is John Mackey? Well, I remember him being one of the highest profile players in the National Football League at the tight end position, where there weren't a lot of notable tight ends back in the day. For the Baltimore Colts, and he was a beast, one of Johnny Unitas's favorite targets. I think I got that all right.
And in terms of what we were just talking about physicality, right? Mackey was a freight train. He was an absolute freight train. You talk about hands. If he got his hands on it, it was a reception. It was caught.
Yeah.
Right. The other thing about these two players, about all the four players that we're going to talk about, but particularly these two, their football IQ really stood out to me. If you watch how they attack zone coverage, you watch them in clutch situations, being able to execute, being able to follow the game plan. Their football IQ is at a level which I think really speaks to their ability to succeed in the NFL. That's the other thing that really stood out for me. These players are clutch, particularly Loveland and Warren. These players are clutch, and they understand the game of football. Absolute joy to watch them play.
Okay, let's move on to our next tight end. Who we got here? Mason Taylor out of LSU, 6'5", 255, 4.64 speed. So he's a little bit faster than the other two. Over 1,000 yards, 6 TDs in 3 seasons. And he has that pedigree that the Rams love, right? So tell us about Mason Taylor, and I'm sure you can include some of his family history as well.
Yeah. So you hit the nail on the head. So, Mason Taylor was a prospect. So just, looking over everything, and something just sort of jumped out at me. I was like, holy cow. You start checking off the box, and you're like, all the things that the Rams love, this kid has. I said, holy cow. Right? First of all, I'm going to go on record is that if he's 6'5", 255, that is an absolute bonus. Right? When I watch him, to me, he doesn't really look at 255, but he's another kid that's really going to benefit from being in an NFL conditioning program and maybe putting on a couple of pounds. So let's take a look at the NFL bloodlines. He is the son of Jason Taylor and the nephew of Zach Thomas. Is that enough to sell you, Mark? Right? The NFL bloodlines right there. So we know how much the Rams value that, the NFL pedigree. He's from Plantation, Florida. He was a 3-star recruit out of high school. He joined the Tigers in 2022, played as a freshman. He is leaving LSU as the all-time leader in tight end receptions. Right? Pretty impressive, right? That's a great program. Ram Nation, let's talk about this. Everybody knows my LSU bias, my LSU and Georgia bias. So absolutely, I love that type of football. But once again, let's take a look at the progression. 22, 38 receptions, 23, 36 receptions, 24, 55 receptions. So there you go. That steady progression. Really underutilized. I thought he was very peculiar how they utilized him at LSU. So once again, you're going to see a trend here when we talk about Loveland and we're going to talk about Mason Taylor, is that the way they were utilized were more as like a more conservative ground and pound offense. A lot of quick hitches, a lot of quick slants, a lot of square outs. That's how they really used Mason Taylor. But from what I see, he's a smooth route runner, solid hands. Love his hands. Understands how to attack zone coverage. Once again, something that we said a common theme. His size looks more like in the realm of, like when I look at him, I see Dalton Kincaid, Mark. I see more in that size, but then we see the numbers of like 6'5", 255. That might be some of those college measurements. So we'll see at the combine how it turns out. Not the most powerful blocker in the world, but he's tough and willing, and blocking is something you really have to work on technique. It's more important, do you have the tenacity? Do you have the willingness? He definitely has to improve his yard after catch capacity. He went down fairly easily, particularly one-on-one scenarios. But when there were opportunities where he could break it off for bigger yardage, where I think he should have taken advantage of that. He will definitely benefit from an NFL conditioning program. Here's something that's interesting. He had a 50-50 split between inline and motion. I thought that was really, really interesting. So the way they were utilizing was almost a 50-50 split. So he has exposure. That's a usual NFL type of assignment. So I think that's going to be useful to really gauge his readiness. But it's hard to evaluate him because he was so underutilized at LSU. So I think he's going to be another player that's going to benefit from the combine when he gets to a chance to show off his skills, full route tree on display, that type of thing. And I think his athleticism is just going to shine through. I think this kid is a really hyper athletic player who is, if you watch him on tape, you're not really going to see the true ability. So if there's any player of this four that's really going to benefit from the combine, it's going to be Mason Taylor, right? I think he's more quick than fast, very scheme-specific player. I think he's going to benefit, sounds like the Rams, right? When he gets to be a move tight end with a lot of option routes, I think this kid will flourish, in my opinion, right? And that's what the Rams love, right? A move tight end, a flex tight end, and they love those option routes. And I think this kid has a skill set to really – and look at that. Look at him high point the ball. I just love the way all three of the players we have talked about, Ram Nation, this is one thing that you cannot overlook. Do they attack the football? And the answer is overwhelmingly yes for all three of the players that we have talked about. They want the rock, and they want the rock in crunch time. I love that characteristic. So his deep speed, people are already questioning that. So that is something that he's going to have to sort of address when he gets that opportunity. Right now, let's take a look at it. He is what McVay was hoping for when they drafted Jacob Harris, Everett, one of my favorite players, Bryson Hopkins, right? I see him, to me, he looks like he's more in that 6'3", 240-ish range. Doesn't have the impressive size of like Loveland and Warren, but he's got that NFL pedigree. He's got the athleticism that McVay loves. That's why it jumped out to me that, wait, this profile might make him very attractive to the Rams, particularly at some of those middle rounds, depending how he does at the showcases. So I think he's going to be a very interesting prospect. I think the Rams are going to love him.
Yeah, for those of you listening on the podcast, Paul was referring to Mason Taylor had a big catch against Alabama in the corner of the end zone there. So if you want to see some of that, we have some clips here that jump on the YouTube channel. You can check them out if you want, that kind of supplement what we're talking about here. The next guy on our list, oh, by the way, so Mason Taylor, you thinking Mason Taylor is maybe a second rounder, third rounder, or where do you think he's going to go?
It's hard to project the rounds because, just like you said, because the production numbers aren't jumping off the charts. So it's really hard to see. So these, he might be one of our Puka power picks, Mark.
Yeah,
you never know, right?
Later pick.
Yeah. Okay, so the range could be anywhere for him. I think it's going to be anywhere from round 3 to round 5. depending how he does at the combine, really.
Yeah, it's probably too early to tell. We'll get into some
Yeah,
mock drafts. We don't want to get into the mock drafts until we know if the Rams are picking 31st or 32nd. That's still to be sorted out, right?
absolutely.
Um,
You know which way we're leaning.
yeah, right. Okay, so next up, the last of our four guys we're really highlighting. We'll talk about some additional guys at the end here. Gunnar Helm out of Texas, 6'5", 250, 4.75 40 time, just under 1,000 yards in his career there, 8 TDs. So you asked me to add Gunnar Helm to this list. Tell us about Gunnar Helm.
Yeah. So first of all, the name like Gunner, you gotta love a kid like that, right? He automatically gets a little extra check mark right there, right? Great name,
For special teams or
as a football player, I just think, right? As a
I
football
made
player,
a little joke there on he could be our gunner, right? But never
listen,
mind.
he's the type of player that if you asked him to play some special teams, he'd probably wind up saying yes and probably wind up doing work. He's that kind of player. So a little bit of history from Greenwood Village in Colorado. He was a 3-star recruit out of high school. He played sparingly as a true freshman, but he did play with Texas. Now, perfect example about college football. So in 2023, who was above him? Jatavian Sanders, right? So when you take a look at his 23 numbers, how are you going to fault this kid, right? Look who he had in front of him. So he only had 14 receptions, but in 2024, 55 receptions, 688 yards, 6 TDs, second team all SEC. Had a breakout game against Michigan, 7 receptions, 98 yards, 1 touchdown, right? Played his best, right? Against the best. That's all I care about. Play your best in the biggest games. He's got the NFL length that everybody loves, 6'5", 250. And when you watch him on film, you see the arms, you see the length. It looks legitimate. Love the catch radius, solid hands, natural feel for the open area of zone, smooth and steady performer. This kid is not flashy. You won't notice him until he's catching that ball in the end zone. That's how this kid just goes about his business, does his job, doesn't complain. I mean, and I watched not just the highlights, I watched the entire game because I want to see what they're doing on plays when they're not getting the ball. And this guy is throwing the body around. His blocking definitely needs work, but they were using him in all types of misdirection plays. And Ram Nation, what's really great about the Gunnar Helm scenario is that we know McVay and Coach Sarkisian over there in Texas are good friends. They have a lot of concepts that are very, very similar, a lot of motion in their offense. So once again, speaking to, is it a good fit? Absolutely. There's another box you can check off. So really like this kid. When he's not getting the ball, he's doing the dirty work. Like I said, smooth and steady performer who is cool under fire. That's the first thing I wrote down after watching 4 games of his. Cool under fire. Not overly physical, but not afraid of contact. So that's something, I mean, once again, NFL weight room, NFL conditioning program. This kid puts on a little bit of mass. He is going to do some damage. Long speed, when you're watching him, he's more smooth than a burner, but he's got that smooth acceleration, which I think is great for tight ends. He was definitely able to get behind the defense on a couple of plays, but, he's plenty quick. And the other thing I like about it, when he's got his hands on the football, it was a reception mark. You're going to love this. How many drops for the year? Big 0. 0 drops for the
Crazy.
year. You got to love it. And that's the type of tight end you want to bring onto your team. So when we take a look at these 4 tight ends, Mark, take a look at the tight end room we were just talking about. If one player drops off, whoever that might be, you draft a player like one of the 4 that we've talked about, right? Boom, there you go. They slide them right in. You're back to your 4 tight end scenario. But I think he's a solid player, hardworking, athletic profile. He is the perfect complement to the Rams tight end room. So all 4 of these players have their pluses and minuses, but overwhelmingly, I think all 4 of these players would fit in very, very well with what the Rams do. Obviously, different timetables in terms of how much they're going to produce. Obviously, if you draft Warren or Loveland, they're going to start playing probably a lot sooner. I'm talking, when I say start playing, I'm talking about heavy reps in comparison to maybe Taylor and Gunner. So in either scenario, the Rams are definitely going to be in a win-win situation if they make tight end a priority.
Yeah, that's the thing with McVay and the way he runs this offense is, if Tyler Higbee's still around and they're still rolling with 11 personnel predominantly, do these guys get on the field much at all? But we'll have to see. Um, and speaking of, how these guys stack up against each other, we made a pass through a little score sheet here, and this is our first take. Take it with a grain of salt at this point, but if you're looking for size and speed, you're probably looking at, the guys that are probably at the top here, Loveland and Warren. Tyler Warren hands, Loveland, Taylor, and Helm all get a check. Yards after catch, I think it's pretty clearly Warren. Versatility, Warren and Helm. And like you said, Helm's not necessarily flashy, but he can do a lot of things for you. And then athleticism, again, Warren. Blocking, I think Loveland is the clear winner in that department. And then you have the intangibles as well. But yeah, we'll have to see how these guys stack up. I'm interested to see. I have not really looked at a lot of boards in depth on all four of these tight ends, where they're ranked and where they might fall. But when we get into our mock drafts, and might be a little while before we do that. Maybe we'll focus.
I like your tail of the tape there. Great. In the terms of, I will say this, in terms of the blocking aspect of it, Warren, the way he was utilized, of all the players that we have showcased today, Warren, to me, the way they utilize him, they use him almost like a pro pass set, having him take on players. I think Warren would have probably the most exposure to NFL-esque type of blocking assignments.
Oh, okay. Fair enough. Hey, let's wrap it up with, this is a really deep draft when it comes to the tight ends. Now, last year, it was pretty top heavy with Brock Bowers. The year before, a bunch of really good tight ends, including Sam Laporta. This year, there are quite a few guys, and I know I'm probably leaving out some very deserving players here, but these are three that we thought we'd mention real quickly. Harold Fanning Jr. He's a lean, probably the most, I'm sure he's the fastest of all these tight ends. Super productive, runs the ball well too. I'm just not sure if he has the build that the Rams would be looking for, 6'4", 230. Do you agree?
Yeah, so 6'4", 230, and timing is everything, right, Mark? And as you know, Ram Nation, as you know, Mark is a timing genius. He brought it up because he knew Harold Fanning was going to blow up last night. So the kid put up 17 catches, 213 yards, and a touchdown in the bowl game last night. It was absolutely ridiculous. The kid also finished FBS season in 2024. He is the leader in receiving yards. 1550. That's not just for tight ends, Mark. That's for all eligible receivers. That's absolutely bananas.
So my stats here are already outdated. they're
no,
obsolete.
You're spot on. Yeah, no, you're spot on. I mean, it's like the athleticism is just unbelievable. The body of work he has put together. So you can see why so many people are enamored with him. And also look at that size, where normally people would shy away from that. But look at the success Bowers has had. He's not 260. He's not 270. He's not that type of tight end. And he's been very, very successful. I think of a lot of these players, like you said, he's that sort of tweener type. Maybe not the best for the Rams, but you never know. This is the kind of player that a coach is going to fall in love with because he produces. Right?
Is he perhaps not a tight end at the NFL level?
Yeah, he's probably going to be something in between, but there are players that we've counted out before, and they've told all the pundits, just watch me, me outperform everything. Right, like we said, there's no such thing as an overachiever, only underestimators. But this kid's got as much talent as anybody.
Yeah. Then there's Mitchell Evans out of Notre Dame, 6'5", 260, and My understanding is he was actually, his rating's been dinged due to an ACL tear that he suffered. Not sure where he is, if he's already recovered. Is that an old injury or a new one? I'm not sure. Uh,
Yeah.
but he's a guy that if it had not been for that, he might have been in the conversation with Loveland and Tyler Warren. So he's a guy that will get drafted. Not sure where.
Yeah, but you know what's interesting about the one of the interesting sort of aspects of these prospects is a quarterback play. Quarterback play can make or break you, correct? Particularly if you're a receiver. And one of the things when they talk about this kid is like, listen, didn't have the luxury of great quarterback. Nothing against the quarterback in Notre Dame, but they love his size, right? If he's got prototypical tight end size, right? But the numbers don't jump off the page, right? Whatever it may be. But once again, the injury scenario, like you brought up, absolutely. But he's one of those tight ends that he's a lunch pail tight end. There's a lot there. Whether or not it's going to come out is another. That's the team that drafts him, that's willing to roll a dice. You might be getting a player at a very low round that has a ton of potential.
Okay. And if there's a tight end at Iowa, well, there's always a tight end at Iowa, isn't there? And he's going to make this list. Luk Lee, 6'6", 247. Am I pronouncing that right? I hope I am.
Yeah, that is correct.
Yeah, 4.72. And, Iowa, we all know about their long history. They're basically tight end university at this point. But Lachey is just another one in a long line of great tight ends there. Just 4 TDs, but he's going to get drafted. Got any inside information on Lachey?
So when you start talking about Iowa tight ends, right, you just fill in the blanks, right? So we know they can block. We know that they're physical. We know that they're willing to do the dirty work, right? Doesn't have great numbers. Also has an injury history, so he's going to be interesting. But look, there are programs that do certain things very well, and Iowa churns out 2 things. What do they churn out? Defensive backs and tight ends. That's if you're not taking. It's not much of a roll of the dice. If in a ladder round that you take a chance, a flyer on one of these players. So the other thing is, it's like you said, it's still early in the process. We saw it last year. How many players did we have on our Puka Power list that we had to take off the list because after the combine they were in the top 50, right? Yeah. So that's another part of the process. But this kid, with the success of prior Iowa tight ends, and the same thing, like a great example of that would be Wisconsin with the offensive linemen, right? The Wisconsin offensive linemen are always considered to be very well versed in certain aspects of blocking, certain schemes, very rugged, multiple position versatility. So I think he's going to benefit from that Iowa tight end reputation. But it's a tough kid. I'll take toughness over 40 times any day.
Okay, good stuff. That's our first dabble into the 2025 NFL draft. And man, I always like this stuff. It's always fun getting to know about these players. And I don't know what we'll do another position in a few weeks here. Try to figure out what positions of interest the Rams might have. It might be left tackle, depending on what happens with Alaric Jackson. I'm really nervous about that. He's a guy we got to extend, and if not, that becomes a major need. Of course, there's the free agent market as well. And by the way, I did look at the tight end free agent market, and it's pretty slim. It's pretty thin, not a lot available there, unrestricted free agents anyways. So I think the Rams are either going to, try to retain the guys they have, and if one of them slips away for whatever reason, they'll draft a tight end. I think they'll draft a tight end regardless, actually.
But, yeah, I agree. I agree with you on that, and especially if they can get a way to get that balance, an offensively gifted player that could sort of balance out Higbee, I think would take this offense into the stratosphere. It really would. The level of physicality that it would bring to this offense. And the one thing that stood out for me this year, Mark, tell me if you agree, was the red zone, right? The red zone efficiency. Nothing boosts your red zone efficiency like a big physical player that is just a matchup nightmare. Can you imagine Warren in the red zone? Can you imagine Loveland in the red zone in this offense?
Yeah, with Kyron
Absolutely
too.
bananas.
Yeah,
Oh, and
yeah.
Stafford. Oof.
Yeah, not that we were planning on talking about this, but as I've been thinking about it recently, I think the Rams needs, depending on what happens with Lyric Jackson, could be left tackle. I think their defense, they've invested so much in the draft on their defense recently.
Yeah.
I think they're going to lean offense, but I do think I would love for them to draft a highly regarded cornerback. Um, and we don't seem to, we haven't done that in a while, draft a cornerback in the first or second round. So I think that's what this defense might be missing. The only thing we know they're not going to draft a linebacker, an inside linebacker, so we'll just poo-poo that idea. They're gonna roll with unrestricted, undrafted free agents, pretty much guys off the street. That's what they've done, except for Ernest Jones. That's what they've done for seems like 10 years. So cornerback, left tackle, tight end. Off the top of my head, those are the positions I'm thinking.
And this is a draft where a lot of people are saying that, it's not like an overwhelming draft. There's not a lot of star power at the top of the list. You're really going to have to, the scouts are really going to have to like delve into, backgrounds and everything else. And that's great. And that's, I think, great for the fans too, because then you really have to sort of do your homework and really, like you were saying, know the names when the names get called on draft day. So you have a little bit of background. I think that's what makes it fun. And like you said, this is our first pass through a couple of prospects. We just wanted to sort of whet the palate for Ram Nation in terms of some of the great names that are out there. We're going to do position groups. Like I said, it's still early in the process. But this is something Mark, I love doing it with Mark. Mark always has great insights. And it's great to get a confirmation when you run a player by, a colleague and that person said, yeah, I see the same thing. That just speaks to the validity of what of the analysis. So it's going to be a lot of fun. And by the time draft day rolls around, hopefully those names are going to be second nature for a lot of Ram Nation out there. So definitely tune in.
It's not so much necessarily trying to get the draft picks right or predict what the Rams are going to do correctly. It's more about just learning more about these players in the NFL draft, and then that parlay that into information and knowledge about them at the NFL level. It's more and more I'm watching games and I see a cornerback on another team that I had forgotten about. It's like, oh, Paul and I talked about him. Yeah,
right.
I remember that guy.
What would be a great position group for us to do, Mark, since you brought up tackle? So we could definitely do tackle, or we could do wide receiver next. I think the wide receiver room is going to be really interesting, just like we were talking about the tight ends. The wide receiver room is going to be really, really interesting.
Yeah, it was the tackle positions concerned me on the interior of the offensive line. The Rams are in a really good place. They really are, with Justin Dedich and Jonah Jackson on the bench, basically, right? And the tackle positions are a little bit more worrisome, depending on what happens with Lyric Jackson and Rob Havenstein getting up there in years. And he's been very steady and very reliable, but he's been dinged up a little bit this year, right? So, and that's what happens as you get older, and we cannot afford. We know what this team can do when the offensive line is intact and healthy. They're unstoppable, and so the Rams have to do everything they can to make sure that continues into 2025. And the left tackle and right tackle positions is what I'm concerned about. Not necessarily a Lyric and Havenstein. Then I'm concerned about them being there and being available is what I'm concerned about, because I don't think we have anybody on this roster right now that I would feel comfortable stepping in at left tackle or right tackle for 4 games. I don't think
that statement speaks volumes, because who's that speaking directly to? Nopum.
Yeah,
right?
and McClendon, yeah.
And then based on what you're saying, I was thinking about it the other day. It might not be a bad roll of the dice to let Jonah Jackson get a couple of looks at tackle. I mean, the kid played tackle in college and early on in his career in college. So seeing he could fill that. I mean, listen, look, you're not going to displace Bo Limmer. The kid's a beast. He's not coming out of that lineup, right? But to have a player like Jonah Jackson who can you got to salvage that contract in some way, shape, or form. If he wants to take that role of swing tackle and also filling in at guard, I mean, who else? The guy's a vet. He's done it. He's got a ton of games under his belt. And then work out the scenario with Noteboom in some other fashion, because, Noteboom is not the answer.
Yeah, if we could lock this up Saturday night and then maybe roll Jonah Jackson, Justin Dedich, Stetson Bennett, Jimmy G, roll some of those guys out there, give them some playing time. That'd be great. Okay, Paul, good stuff. Getting the 2025 draft season officially kicked off here at Rams Up. And man, what did we do last year? We must have done like 20 mock drafts, right?
Oh, I think we surpassed 20.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Okay,
and we're going to have some pre-playoff content coming in with some of our buddies from maybe somebody from up north, right? Might be popping in to say hi. So we got a lot of good content coming, getting ready for the playoffs, Ram Nation. So definitely like and subscribe. Keep those comments coming, and we'll get to them. We promise, like within 24 hours, we're going to make sure we hit those comments.
Okay, man. Thanks a lot, Paul. You have a good weekend, and maybe we'll be talking late Saturday, early Sunday morning about the NFC West Divisional Champion Los Angeles Rams. Out here, man. Thanks a lot.
Bring it home in 25. Rambling forever.
Okay, out here. That's going to do it for this episode. Remember, you can reach us at ramsuppodcast@gmail.com. And don't forget about our YouTube channel. Our handle is at laramsup.com. Till next time, keep the horns up, stay safe, and have fun out there.